Thank you, sir.
Let's get started again. Hello, Dr. Dr. Henderson.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, for taking the time to talk with us and for your interest in the position. We are very glad to have you here today.
It's certainly my pleasure and honor.
We have a number of questions to ask you. And I will ask everybody, different members of the committee will ask you the questions, and I will ask everybody when you ask the questions to get close to the microphone so Dr. Henderson can hear us. So the first question is, please give us a 5-minute overview of how your experience has prepared you to be president of LSU.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And forgive me if my energy is a little bit high today. I just left an interview at PBS and got a text that said, good luck on your 10 o'clock interview. And since it's at 11, it did result in an energy surge. But thank you for that question. And experience is vitally important here. For the last 16 years, I have led Louisiana higher education institutions. I've led them to achieve some remarkable successes. I helped re-envision a statewide community and technical college system, placing it as the hub of workforce development in our state. I led the transformation of a community college into a national model of growth and innovation, creating an economic driver for an entire region and expanding access to higher education to populations that have long been underserved. I helped my alma mater overcome a culture of retrenchment and some might even say malaise. We energized the campus community. We enriched student life. We expanded academic programming. We created a mindset of growth and self-determination. Now, in my current role as president and CEO of the University of Louisiana system, I lead one of the nation's largest higher education systems. I work with a 16-person gubernatorially appointed board, not unlike that governs LSU. I work with that board to provide the fiduciary, the strategic, the generative governance, if you will, of a system that comprises 3 comprehensive research universities, 5 regional universities, and 1 iconic historically Black university. Collectively, our member institutions serve more than 91,000 students and conduct nearly $200 million a year in federally funded research. The system operates with a $1.3 billion operating budget, and we employ approximately 4,400 faculty. Every year, we generate $10.9 billion in economic impact for the state of Louisiana. Reporting directly to me in this work is a 5-person executive team that is very diverse, very dynamic, very high performing. And I also supervise the daily operations of 9 university presidents. Now, I have led institutions through severe budget reductions, through natural disasters, through periods of social unrest and even traumatic events. In fact, I've held the hands of faculty and students following some unspeakable trauma. Walked outside in the immediate aftermath of that trauma to address a national audience on the events of the day, and then walked beside that campus community through the months of healing and recovery. Those are the experiences that prepare one for what Admiral McCraven, the former commander of U.S. Naval Special Forces, called the most difficult job in America, that of a university president. During these past 16 years, I've developed deep and lasting relationships with policymakers, with legislators from both sides of the aisle, and representing a wide spectrum of ideologies. I've traveled the globe. I've developed partnerships on 4 continents, while driving over 700,000 miles within the borders of our own state, talking with community leaders and influencers about the importance of our work. I dare say those experiences have not only prepared me to lead a flagship system, they specifically prepared me to lead Louisiana's flagship. And over the next hour, I look forward to articulating that preparation in greater detail with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And a related question. what's your vision for LSU as an 8-institution system, including LSU Ag Center and health centers? Please describe short and long-term goals and metrics to measure your success.
Yeah, and we have 1 hour left, so I'm going to try to get it through the question as much as possible. And I won't make jokes. I apologize, but
That's okay.
it was the establishment of the one LSU concept nearly a decade ago that was a bold vision for LSU. And LSU is distinct amongst the higher ed systems in Louisiana. It's because it's a vertically integrated collection of institutions with remarkable scope. And the structure allows for a remarkable level of system thinking and collaboration. Now, you have to recognize the important role of each component, but combining efforts in a manner that maximizes resource utilization, drives collaborative academic planning, and the pursuit of research beyond what is possible as a loose confederation of discrete entities, that looks great in concept, but it requires leadership. Now, the 9-institution system that I lead now, 4 years ago, was a confederation of loosely associated universities. We began the collaborative work of building a system, realizing and respecting the value of the distinct components, but embracing the potential for leverage of systemness. We've seen that play out in our systemic work, the development of a strategic framework, a framework that promises to produce the most educated generation in Louisiana's history, and to drive innovation through research, through public-private partnerships. It led to the creation of the Reginald F. Lewis Educational Equity Initiative, the groundbreaking Compete Louisiana program that is addressing the needs of the 653,000 Louisiana adults that have some college and no degree, who will be absolutely essential to our ability to compete in the future. It led to the creation of our professional development program, a very robust management and leadership institute, so that we're developing the leaders of tomorrow from within our own populations. We've achieved this level of systemness in a system without a clear flagship, so it makes it even a little bit more challenging. The potential to do this at an even higher level in regard to LSU is almost limitless. The issue is less about structure and it's more about leadership again. Now, that leadership has to be based, at least in part, on meaningful goals and metrics. And you mentioned those metrics a second ago. I love some of the aspirations articulated in the LSU strategic plan. Aspirations are key, and they are motivating, and they're influencing, and they must speak to a broad array of stakeholders, the faculty, the alumni, our staff, our community leaders, certainly the students. But it's the metrics underlying those aspirations are every bit as important. Lofty aspirations, they make for great publications. But when lofty aspirations are supported by anemic metrics, we fail to achieve what's possible. I'd like to engage this board, the faculty, the staff, the broader system community, if you will, in a conversation about those current aspirations and the measures underlying them. We have some short-term challenges. We know that. Those are very fixable. It's the long-term vision that's most concerning to me. How are we preparing the next generation for the future of work? How are we preparing Louisiana for the national energy transformation that's coming? And how are we doing that through research, through education, through workforce development? Are we engaging the employer community in those kinds of conversations? How are we driving improved health outcomes across the state in a coordinated, impactful fashion? How are we breaking ground in discovery, which you know a lot about yourself? Finally, how do we articulate these efforts to those we serve? That will prove critical, because as we create a truly globally competitive flagship system for Louisiana.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell is here. Sorry, Mr. Nelson, yes.
Good morning. Can you please describe your leadership style with emphasis on hiring, delegation, and decision-making?
So I better get this one right. I teach in the doctoral program at Northwestern State, and I teach higher ed leadership and change management. And I'll have a number of students that are getting ready to graduate that will grade me quite hard on this question if I don't get it right. And I could talk about describing my leadership as participatory, as aspirational, as transformational. I can give you all the buzzwords and I can recite the management theories. But I've learned that leadership in higher education is distinct from nearly every other application. I mentioned Admiral McCraven earlier. He was the retired commander of U.S. Naval Special Forces, and it was upon his retirement after 3 years as president at the University of Texas that he said that about being a college president. He also said it about leading a healthcare entity. The reason that these jobs are so difficult, it's the variety of deeply interested constituencies. They all have their own ideas and goals for the university or the university system. And the challenge is those goals sometimes are in conflict. Presidents have to rise above and bring that university community along with them. One critical element is the people and the voices at the table. I've spent my career studying both informally and formally the effect of top management teams. And I've come to one conclusion that I think is almost indisputable. The success of a complex organization is directly attributable to the characteristics, the functionality, the empowerment of the top management team. First and foremost, that team must be demographically, experientially, psychometrically diverse. In fact, the more closely that team reflects the communities that you intend to serve, the more likely your organization is to be successful. Now, beyond the team is the vision, and there must be room for disagreement and conflict on tactical and strategic approaches in support of that vision. But that disagreement is constructive in an environment of trust and when there's unity of purpose. That stems from creating visions of purpose and communicating that vision in accessible and compelling manner, ensuring that the total organization is committed to achieving the vision. And then ensuring the values and principles that we all espouse as we develop strategic plans are represented every single day, and they're represented through authentic leadership. I think that's got to be key at LSU and really at any organization that truly wants to be consequential in its work.
Thank you. Ms. Wagner?
Okay. Hello? Okay. Hi, and good morning and welcome. So my question, you've seen the LSU Title IX issues and many headlines, of course. How do you make protection of students, faculty, and staff from sexual harassment, discrimination, and assault a hardline priority for all institutions of the LSU system?
What an incredibly important question, because really there's nothing else that's more important than that. In fact, I mentioned that I just left an interview at LPB. I was with Interim President Galligan and Morgan Lamondre from STAR, and with Senator Mizell and with Senator Barrow, and we were talking about how universities can implement stronger Title IX policies and practices, and those are important. But I want to step back from that for just a minute, because Title IX is statute, it's federal law, it's regulatory. And it's insufficient for us to be compliant. You have to step beyond that and stop asking, are we doing the things we're required to do? And ask ourselves, are we doing the things we should do to protect students? I listened to some of the student testimony at the various Senate Select Committee on Women, and their testimony was compelling. It was raw. It was gut-wrenching. I've read the Hush Blackwell report. Gut-wrenching, I think, is the word. It hits you in a very visceral way. We cannot comply ourselves into the culture we should be in. So it takes a two-pronged approach. One, you have to be intolerant of violations of process. Your process has to be clear. We have in Louisiana a number of requirements. One is for training. There's the sexual harassment training, 1 hour that every person, every employee in the state of Louisiana has to take. It's good training. I don't dismiss it, but it's 1 hour. We had a report that came out in February that only 92% of the employees in the UL system had complied with that requirement. And I was livid. And when I talked to our university presidents, they too were livid. And we said, you know what, over the next 30 days, we're going to be at 100% compliance. And we're going to change the reporting system so that we know ahead of time, not only has the training been completed, but how is it impacting us as an organization? Now, I was a little surprised that we were actually one of the top performing entities in the state when it came to compliance with that. And that's unfortunate. So you establish an expectation that compliance is non-negotiable. And then you ensure that your policy environment starts and ends with the needs of the student, not the needs of the institution. You see, we approach Title IX because it is a regulatory apparatus with a risk management mentality instead of a student safety mentality. We've got to ensure that victims and claimants that come to us are treated with respect and empathy. There is a limit on how much support can be provided from Title IX officers themselves. But you have to have an apparatus within your university outside of that that is truly advocating for that victim and for that claimant and providing them with the restorative work that needs to take place immediately with the trauma intervention. And so you put these practices in place. And then you have to realize there's an old management maxim that called events plus response equals outcome. We're institutions of people, and we're institutions of flawed people, and they're going to make mistakes. And those are the events. We can't control that 100% of the time. We can reduce the occurrence of sexual violence, but we can't totally prevent it. When those events occur, what we can control is our response. And that response is what determines the ultimate outcome. And if we have outcomes that are defined in terms of meeting the needs of students and creating safe environments and responding first and foremost with the students' needs as the paramount concern, then we can affect cultural change that will improve the quality of life and the safety on all of our campuses around the state.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Ms. Barrios?
Yeah. Hey, good morning, Dr. Henderson.
Hey, good morning.
My question is, how would you ensure that LSU campuses remain student-centered? Please describe how you interact with and engage students, specifically in the area of fostering student success. And how do you incorporate student input and respond to their needs and concerns?
And thank you so much for that question. You're actually hitting on one of the reasons why I'm pursuing this opportunity, and it's that connection with students. I derive so much intrinsic value from the daily interactions with students, from this indescribable joy of going to a recruiting event and bringing a student to your institution and telling them all the great things that your institution stands for and what your institution is going to do for that student and what their experience is going to be like. Watching that student thrive in the collegiate environment, watching them become involved in leadership activities or social activities, watching them excel in the classroom, watch them engage in levels of research that they didn't think were possible as an undergraduate. And then that unparalleled joy of watching them walk across the stage at graduation. I used to take the graduation program before a ceremony, and I would read through the list. And inevitably there would be 15, 20, maybe even up to 50 names that jumped out at me. Maybe it was a Holly Conway, who was Miss Louisiana, who had a starring role in the production of Rent, who now stars, by the way, as Tina on Broadway. Maybe it was one of those students, or maybe it was a student that had a question about where to go for the first day of class, and that name jumps out at you. And you think, wow, I can't wait to see them come across the stage. And then as we start that parade of graduating students and you get to look in the faces and you say, wait a second, I remember this student because I almost bumped into him coming out of a classroom too fast. I was late for a meeting. I remember this student in an article they wrote for the student newspaper, or a research presentation at an academic honors day from this particular student. And then you realize it's hundreds of stories that make up your work. Again, you can't describe how much joy comes from that interaction. At the same time, I love the daily back and forth. You know, when you look at traditional students, the current generation of students is extraordinarily thoughtful. And some people say it in a way that's means to be not taken in a positive way, but you're woke, right? You're woke more about some of the things that get disparaged. You're woke about life in general. And you approach life with this sense of community and this sense of purpose and this the sense of dream that is inspiring to me. And I love connecting with students. I love social media. I'm on Twitter. I think if you're going to be connecting with students, you have to be accessible to students. And so Twitter is probably my favorite platform. Some of the newer ones, I am getting a little older. It's a little harder to take that up. But I interact with students quite often. In fact, if it's going to snow, I'll start getting Twitter messages that say, hey, when are you canceling classes? And so, that just leads to a bunch of interactions. Students know they can reach out to me at any time. I have a true 24/7 open door policy. There's a cell phone number on my Facebook profile that is my cell phone number. That matters, being accessible. And then the other piece I mentioned is being present. I can't tell you the number of times that I have uncovered issues or challenges or potential at a university just by being present and engaging in a conversation with students. Data matters, right? And you have to have data-informed decisions, especially when it comes to student success, so that you have early interventions when you uncover a problem that the data supports. But the data isn't human. Students are human beings. And so that daily connection with them and ensuring that you're in touch with number one, where they are, and maybe even more importantly, where they want to be, is absolutely critical to the success of the university. I hope that's fair.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell?
Sure. How you doing this morning, Dr. Henderson?
I'm doing well, sir. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, and your Twitter presence is impressive. Beautiful grandchildren.
Oh,
Beautiful.
You know what? My wife would be with me, but she is babysitting in Dallas right now. And folks, if you don't know, I have 2 3-week-old twin grandbabies, Maria Therese and Miguel Clement. And they have a 1-year-old older brother, Zachary Joseph. So Tanya is babysitting and has been for about 2 months now.
So, well, tell us, how would you approach leading and working with faculty? What are your views on faculty governance? Please describe your previous experience in leading, supporting, and/or growing research and scholarly activity through your work with the faculty.
Dr. Mitchell, you've hit on the other prong of the 2-prong impetus for me seeking this, and that's the daily interaction with faculty. I love working with faculty. They're thought leaders, they're provocative, they're engaging, they have great stories to tell, they're answering a calling. And so that interaction, that intellectual interaction and the social interaction with faculty is again a great source of joy for me. Now, specifically shared governance, that it's essential in a complex higher education environment. Shared governance is more than just having a voice or having a faculty senate that can make a vote or recommendation. It's about a two-way street, right? It's engaging faculty by being very, very transparent in your approach to the work. Not just saying this is what we're going to do, but answering the question why we're going to do this. Developing a level of trust. When I was at Northwestern State, I would send a weekly email to the whole campus community, just describing some issues of the day, and sometimes they were of significant import. Sometimes they were much less of that. And then describing what my week was, and not every minute, but maybe the things that I thought that faculty might would be interested in. And then inviting them to weigh in on if they read something that, that didn't make sense, email me or call me or text me and say, hey, listen, I saw this in your report. I didn't quite understand what you're talking about here. And so that daily interaction is absolutely key. And then I also like to engage faculty in an ad hoc basis. I was interviewing for the presidency at Northwestern State, and a faculty member who I remembered from my days as an undergraduate. So he wasn't the youngest faculty member in the room. He'd been there for some time. And he went on a rant, an epic rant about some budgetary decisions that had been made at the university. And he won't mind me saying, so I called Ben after I got into the office and said, listen, I'm putting together a task force, an ad hoc task force on a strategic budgeting initiative. And he says, well, great, I'm glad to hear that. And I said, you're the chair of it. And there was silence, and maybe the longest period of silence that Ben has ever suffered through. And I put together a committee of faculty, and our CFO was on it, but the CFO was not the leader in the room. It was led by faculty. I put the institutional effectiveness gurus on this committee. I brought in an economist who was very soft-spoken, unless he was speaking in Russian. a person who had been on the World Bank board, who had some experiences in finance and add richness, intellectual richness to the conversation. After the third meeting, Marcus Jones, who was just named the interim president at Northwestern State, I had put him on the committee. He called me and says, "Doc, this is not working, man. We're arguing, we're debating, we're not making any progress." I said, "Well, give it 2 more meetings." By the end of about 6 more meetings, they came out with what I think is one of the most innovative budgeting transparency documents that exist in higher education. It's one that informs our decision-making on how we allocate budgets based on the purpose of the institution and the priorities of the institution. There's an old saying, if you show me your budget, I'll show you what your priorities are. And it added a level of transparency that resulted in trust. Right? Also develop diverse teams and bring teams to the table that think differently about the different aspects of a particular incident. And sometimes it's teams that aren't diverse. Maybe it's homogenous teams because it's an incident or instance that is so specific that you really need to dig down deep into why this incident is affecting certain populations. And we had there was a piece of legislation that had been filed that was especially, that seemed a little problematic. And just this last week, I had faculty join me on Zoom from 4 different institutions that had never met. A couple of them had never met me. And I just laid out a proposition and I said, "Now I'm going to sit back and I'm going to listen to a conversation." You can learn so much from faculty, but they need our support and they need our leadership. And so we created at our system the For Our Future Conference, which is an annual conference of 9 institutions coming together to share research findings, to share scholarly activities, to share maybe new techniques in teaching in an online environment, or maybe more effective ways to teach in hybrid environments, or more effective ways to teach in traditional environments. Guess what? We still teach in traditional environments sometimes. We created networks of subject matter experts from various disciplines on different operations in the organization. And then we invest in professional development, and that's got to be key. People often say that if you invest in the development of your people, they're going to leave you. And I said, well, what if you don't invest in the development of your people and they stay? That's more problematic, right? If we're going to have world-class faculty, we have to recruit world-class faculty. We have to retain world-class faculty, but we have to develop world-class faculty. And professional development, and this is unfortunate, that when we went through an 8-year cataclysmic disinvestment of state resources in higher education, one of the first things that we cut was professional development for faculty. That's a mistake. It's one that's going to take us a long time to overcome, but I'm here for it, and we're gonna make that work. So, Dr. Mitchell, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clark?
Thank you. Dr. Henderson.
Dr. Clark, it's good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, sir. In a time of limited and even shrinking resources, budgeting and resources allocations and important responsibilities, budget cuts to higher education have resulted in many unfilled faculty and staff positions, lagging salaries, fewer graduate students, and higher tuition and overhead fees. How can the LSU system begin to address some of these inequities over the next 5 years, assuming that there are not higher budgets?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would do what a regional university in my hometown has done by being creative, by being innovative, and driving resources in a way that nobody would have thought possible. I'm going to date myself, maybe 8 years ago. And I've watched what's happened at LSUS, how you found a niche in the market and you went after it. It's kind of a blue ocean approach to management is the way we would refer to it. And what a success story that is. And I don't know that enough people in the state of Louisiana know what a success story that is. But it's taking that approach, and you can do that in a systemic way. In a systemic way, you have to find ways to eliminate administration and bureaucracy. We have to quit adding layers of bureaucracy and administration to these organizations. Levelize organizations, use technology to its appropriate ends, not just as a way to do the task that we always have done in a technologically enhanced way, but to replace some of the things that maybe we've done or rethink the way that we've done things. And so taking a very systemic approach to that is absolutely key. Now, I do want to go back to one piece, because you said without assuming higher budgets. And I get it, you can't assume that. But we can't give up on that either. You know, we went through this disinvestment in Louisiana, as much of the nation did. But we have historically been one of the most underfunded operations in the country. And this is about priorities. I said earlier, you show me your budget, I'll show you priorities. In Alabama, they spend $130 more per capita, per citizen of the state of Alabama, in direct state support of higher education. Now, that difference includes TOPS, right, in terms of Louisiana's comparison to that. Mississippi and Arkansas, it's about $85 more per capita. In the state of Texas, and I want you to think about the economies of scale in the state of Texas, 10 four-year higher education systems, 50 community college systems. They have as many people in greater Houston as we do in the entire state of Louisiana. You have economies of scale. They spend $35 more per capita in state support of higher education. We've got to be innovative. We've got to be entrepreneurial. We've got to own the part of the problem that we can. But we also have to be fearless advocates for prioritizing higher education more in the state of Louisiana. Because listen, the demands of the 21st century economy are going to demand a more educated populace than ever before. And we can't do it unless we have a strong higher ed enterprise. That's going to take some investments. We can't rely on the legislature to do it all, not even close. We've got to strongly advocate and make a case, a very compelling case that leads to increased investments. And then we have to do our part of ensuring we're good stewards of every penny we get, and that we're tirelessly advocating across the board for faculty and staff and our leaders to be entrepreneurial, innovative, and drive that revenue equation for all of us. Listen, part of it is we've got to quit divesting ourselves of revenue drivers. When I got to Northwestern, we didn't have enough faculty to offer enough classes to grow the institution. So we added 40 new faculty members in the first year. Faculty are essential to growing institutions. And so you have to have a sufficient number of faculty who are ready to grow those institutions. It's a very complex argument. I'm answering it in just a couple of minutes is difficult, but it's something we have to control our own destiny. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Smith?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please discuss your commitment to and experience in enhancing diversity, including diversity as it relates to underrepresented groups, as well as diversity of thought, experience, etc.
Goodness, thank you. Thank you for that question. This is one that's quite personal to me. It was 22 years ago. I was in private sector leadership, and I was working at a company that ran into an issue. And as organizations tend to do when they run into an issue, they react, right? And so we had to send one of our leadership teams to a diversity training program. Since I was the youngest in the executive team, I was the one chosen. And I attended the Multicultural Food Service and Hospitality Alliance convention in San Antonio. And I learned a lot from the programming. I learned far more from interacting with other attendees, most of whom did not look anything like me. That was one of my introductions to diversity and inclusion. It was when I realized after that conference that diversity and inclusion, you can approach it because it's a moral imperative, which is one of the ways that I approach it. And if you don't subscribe to that, you better understand that it's a business imperative. If you're going to be successful serving a diverse community, you better be welcoming to that community. And so at every organization of which I've been a part, diversity and inclusion has been a key component of that. At the system office, we created the Reginald F. Lewis Educational Equity Initiative. Reginald F. Lewis was an entrepreneur from Baltimore. He went on, he attended Harvard Law School. He was the first African-American to lead a $1 billion leveraged buyout of Beatrice Foods, a European conglomerate. I spent many hours, a couple of days with his widow, Loida Lewis, a few years ago, talking to her about the work that we're doing in our system, how we're empowering people with their own economic self-sufficiency, how we are changing lives for underserved populations. And I said, we would love to label as an umbrella term of all these initiatives. We'd like to use Reginald F. Lewis's name, and she gave us her blessing after she visited with students around our universities. We created the Inclusive Excellence seminar for all of our institutions where we come together and talk about nothing but issues of inclusion and diversity and how it can be more inclusive environments. We created a champion of diversity and inclusion, and this gets to how complex this argument is. This year's champion of diversity and inclusion is from Grambling State, Dr. Rudolph Ellis. And people say, well, why do you need a diversity champion at an HBCU? And this is, again, another realm of diversity and inclusion, because what Rudolph Ellis has done is revolutionary, groundbreaking works in inclusion for the LGBTQIA plus community at the campus at Grambling. And if you think about an African-American male who may be gay, there's very specific societal barriers that face that person. And Dr. Ellis has been one who's educated me and educated the entire campus community around that. And this is where it gets a little bit personal, because at one point, understanding diversity and inclusion is an evolution. I attended a poetry recitation by Maya Angelou 15 years ago. And she recited her own poetry, and then she started reciting that of others. And one of those was Langston Hughes. And I won't recite the whole thing for you, but part of the speech was says, tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. And I said, that's it, man. That's it. That's what inclusion is. It's having a seat at the table. But then one day I got an email. I'm the president at Northwestern State, and I get an email from a student that was very succinct, almost curt, that said, Dr. Henderson, the BBPWI chapter is meeting this evening at 6 o'clock, and we would like you to be there. And I responded, I said, absolutely, I wouldn't miss it for the world. And then I went to Google and says, what is BBPWI? BBPWI stands for Being Black at a Predominantly White Institution. So I attended the meeting, and I wasn't sure what to expect. And Reginald Williams got to the mic, the student leader, and he says, Doc, we appreciate you being here. We appreciate the way you treat us. We felt like we could trust you to have this conversation. He goes, you know, I lead a Greek organization. We are included in every Greek activity that happens that's across this university. He goes, you know, just one time though, we would like to be invited to the festivity or to the event, not just because we can do a step show. You see, we had created a seat at the table for his organization, but it was a seat within defined parameters. And we said, this is what we expect of you, and we're going to limit what you do. That's inclusion. It's not belonging. And it was Tanisha Mallory, who was the Chief Diversity Officer at University of Louisiana Lafayette, who taught me that concept of belonging. And that's next level diversity and inclusion, right? It's not just about measuring the numbers of students we have on our campuses. It's ensuring that we have environments that, regardless of where you come from, and regardless of the way that you're viewed in general as an individual or as part of a group, that you have every opportunity to be successful. And we're going to actively, as institutions, knock down the barriers that we can identify that prevent you from doing that. This June, in the second week of June, UL System is hosting a Black Male Summit. Gabe Willis from Southeastern and Kedrick Nicholas from McNeese called me and said, listen, we've got this idea about having a Black Male Summit. Would you support it? And I said, listen, I'll support it, but we're bringing Claire Norris to the table, because Claire is the one that's going to help us take this to the next level. I had no idea what Claire would do. I do know now we have a council that's made up of 45 faculty and staff from across our system that are divided up into, I believe, 5 categories, talking about nothing but the Black male experience. They've created a Black male council, and their work is to ensure that we have a conference that is not an endpoint or an outcome in and of itself, but is one that is so enriching and so galvanizing that it leads us to do dramatic work to improve the outcomes of a specific population that we've underserved for a long time. I'm passionate about that work. You know, this last Thursday, we appointed my right-hand guy, Marcus Jones, to be the interim president at Northwestern State. We did it because Marcus is an accomplished educational administrator. The number of calls and texts that I received from friends of mine from the Black community that said what we had done was revolutionary was humbling. It was the right decision. All that we had done was give Marcus an opportunity to expand his horizons, to gain the experiences necessary, and put him in a place when an opportunity arose, he was the natural fit to go into that position. We weren't making a social statement. We were taking care of an institution with the best decision at the time. It was the work we had done leading up to that decision that allowed us to be made. I'm so proud of that work. We've got miles to go. We've got miles to go, but we're making extraordinary progress, and I couldn't be prouder of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Laborde, do you want to ask the next question?
Yes, I've got it. Are we on number 8? 9.
9.
Okay, got it. All right. Dr. Henderson, thank you for being with us this morning.
It's my pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. And COVID-19 has dramatically impacted campus life and daily life. What are your thoughts for fall semester 2021 and beyond for extended or new COVID protocols?
Well, thank you for the question, and I want to address it directly. Before I talk about fall 2021, I do think it's instructive if we look back to last March, right? And I remember it was March 9th when I had the 9 university presidents in my office in the Claiborne building here in Baton Rouge. We were planning our legislative strategies to go to the Capitol and talk about a reinvestment in faculty, a reinvestment in research, a reinvestment in our work. Unfortunately, the weekend preceding that meeting, we had come to terms with the fact that we were in a global pandemic. And 3 weeks after that meeting, we had moved the totality of our operation to an online environment. The work of faculty and staff to pull that off in support of students, in support of our mission, I will never forget. If you had told me that on January 1st that we were going to have to do that, I would have told you it's physically impossible. But faculty and staff made it happen. And it wasn't perfect. By no means was it perfect, but it was as perfect as it could be within the circumstances. And we got through that spring semester, and then we spent the whole of the summer preparing for what the fall could look like. And we made some great decisions based on the information that we had at the time. But as you know, when a novel virus emerges, that learning curve exponentially grows. You learn so much in so short order. So we created the safe environments we could. We adapted when the decisions we made weren't exactly right, and we tried to make the right decisions. But now we know so much more than we did last year at this time. And we've got the advent of vaccines. And the vaccines are an absolute game changer. There's been a lot of news lately about higher education institutions mandating vaccines. And one of the first to do it was a public flagship university, Rutgers University announced it. Now, to date, it's the only public flagship that has talked about a universal vaccine mandate. You've seen a number of other smaller public institutions that have done it. You've seen some private institutions have done it. You have seen some public, very high profile public institutions that have said once the vaccine moves from emergency use authorization and the biologics license application is approved, then we will require it. And I think that is a very defensible move. I am one, and there's people that can disagree with this, and I appreciate that because there's merits to both sides of the argument. I have some ethical challenges with mandating as a public body that students take a vaccine that's under an emergency use authorization. Now, that's a short-term quibble because, as I understand it, the biologics license application from both Pfizer and Moderna will be going in very quickly. And hopefully within 6 months, this is an aspect of the conversation we won't have to engage in anymore. But we know a couple of things. One, that we likely won't have full use vaccines available in time for the fall semester. So what does that mean for us? It means that we have to still implement the safeguards that are informed by science and informed by public health officials. From the very beginning days of this pandemic, the UL system is operated under a framework, if you will. It is a framework that allowed institutions to respond to the needs of their local communities. And if you think about the needs of an urban research institution in the metropolitan region, the urban region of New Orleans, and compare that to a research institution in relatively rural Lincoln Parish, there's different environmental concerns. But where there's a constant is we said the number one priority is the health and safety of students, faculty, and staff. And so absent a vaccine mandate, if that's not an option available to us, then we have to ensure that we have the safeguards and accommodation that reinforce that number one principle, health and safety of students, faculty, and staff. I do think there's going to be some announcements coming over the next weeks, some breakthroughs, some ideas about prevention. We've already seen that evolve over time, where we've gone for where there was no reason for a healthy person to wear a mask, to where a mask can be an essential barrier to the spread of the virus. We've gone to where surface area contamination was viewed as a primary source of transmission. And now we understand that it really wasn't that much of a source of transmission. We're going to consult with our faculty, by the way, that are experts in epidemiology. It's amazing. We deal with some complex problems, and yet we have people who have devoted their lives to solving those complex problems, and we never consult with them. So we're going to create the safest environment. I think it's going to be a fall that is much more like the traditional collegiate experience than ever before. But I will tell you, it's not going to be 100%, because if we're going to abide by that first principle, we have to have the safeguards in place that protect students, faculty, and staff. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Caslow? Oh,
Dr. Johnson.
sorry, Mr. Johnson, yes.
Dr. Johnson.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
We'd all like to thank you for your service to the state throughout all the years.
Appreciate that.
I must say, I was delighted to hear your philosophy concerning the public's continued role and responsibility for funding of higher education in the state. We should never, ever let up on that for a moment. But this morning, we would also like for you to discuss your fundraising experiences and thoughts on additional revenue generational opportunities. And if you would, give us some demonstrated examples of your success and failures, for that matter.
Well, I appreciate the question. And listen, non-traditional sources of revenue, or even traditional sources, but outside of state funding and outside of tuition and fee generation, we've got to be more creative in generating revenues, right? Either through entrepreneurial activities, through public-private partnerships, that's key. But fundraising is absolutely essential. Now, when you look across the United States, you will see that the institutions that have been the most successful in fundraising, and just look at endowments, at level of endowments, those that have been the most successful in fundraisings are the ones that are typically referred to when you think about the highest performing institutions or the most elite institutions. They're not elite because of their fundraising prowess. Their fundraising prowess is enhanced because they're elite. Because donors don't necessarily give to need. They give to excellence. They give to organizations that they trust. They give to organizations and missions that they believe in. And here's the key. They give to those who ask. I think fundraising has become one of the most important roles for a university president. But it's not about just going out and selling an institution. It's about developing relationships with potential donors, showcasing what makes your institution worthy of their investment, worthy of their treasure, worthy of their time. That takes someone who can tell a message and someone who is willing to convey that message ad nauseum, right? And I think there's immense room for all of higher ed, certainly within my system and within my institutions, to drive fundraising. I think that there's dollars that we've left on the table because of an inability or an unwillingness to ask in an appropriate way. So we have to do that. I did that when I was at Northwestern. We increased annual fundraising by 50% over the first 2 years that I was there. We raised private fundraising. I was blessed to do this At Bossier Parish Community College, we had a library that was off-putting. We raised dollars from the private sector to come in and reinvest and create a state-of-the-art and probably best-in-class learning commons at that university. And then I get to my alma mater, Northwestern State, and I remember distinctly portions of the first floor of the library that had the most the off-putting orange carpet and outdated books, and it was just not a place that I wanted to be a part of. And when I returned, the same carpet and the same books were in the same location, just maybe another inch of dirt. And I said, this is why, if this is the library, if the academic library is the hub of scholarship and research on a campus, then this is unacceptable. And so we raised the private resources to come in and totally revamp. And it did become a hub of research. We brought in, and I apologize, my mother, who has a degree in library science amongst her multiple graduate degrees, recoiled when I told her that we were putting a Starbucks in the library. But I'm telling you, the traffic that started coming to the library to get a soy latte, all of a sudden realized this might be a good place for me to study, right? And they went over and they saw an environment that was welcoming to students. Oh, and by the way, we moved the Academic Advising Center to a part of the library that had become just totally out of use, so that now we're encouraging even more traffic to come there, right? And when we brought that vision to a potential donor, he says, that's something I can get behind. And we did that without $1 in state resources. You know, we raised private dollars for athletics. I remember Tynes Hildebrand was a longtime athletic director at Northwestern State, a legend in his time, a legend for being very frugal with resources. And I think that the seats that he bought for the stadium were dilapidated and miscolored when he bought them in 1977, and they were still there. We showed a potential donor what those look like, and he goes, okay, well, what's the deal? And then we showed him a description of what they could be. And he says, oh, he goes, I'd kind of like to have my name on that. This is a donor that really wasn't interested in the academic pursuits, but he was willing to give back to the university. And so this was, you can think, okay, what difference do seats in a stadium mean? Well, when this stadium is visible from almost every angle as you drive around the campus, and you see a dilapidated environment, you draw, as you're coming in as a recruit or as coming in as a potential parent, you say this institution isn't serious if they're willing to let this be their front door. And so it had an extraordinary impact on the campus across the board. We were very successful in getting endowed scholarships. In fact, we received for the first time at the UL system. And listen, you talk about difficulty in fundraising. Try to get someone to contribute to a system, because we don't have a single alum. We don't serve a single student at the system level. But we made a case about what we were doing with the Reginald F. Lewis Educational Equity Initiative. We put it out in the news. It made it around the country. And we immediately got an $800,000 check from an anonymous donor and said, I want to support what you're doing. Donors give to excellence. They give to organizations they believe in. They give to missions they support. And they give to those who ask. I hope that's fair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Warner?
Yes. Good morning, Dr. Henderson. Thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate all your time. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Thank you.
My question today is, we'd like to know what is your vision for the success of LSU athletics and its role in the holistic development of student athletes?
Oh, I'm glad you put it that way, because that's so important. You know, 1941, my dad was in Jennings, Louisiana, and a buddy of his was going to go up to Louisiana Tech because he wanted to try out for the football team. And he says, what are you doing? My dad said, oh, not much. And he jumped in the car and rode up there with him. And a guy named Joe Ia, who was the football coach at Tech, looked at my dad and says, well, why are you here? And he says, I'm just waiting on my buddy. He says, why don't you try out as well? He tried out and he got a scholarship. Now, my dad likely would have gone to school, but for so many student athletes, that's their only access to school. But we saw something else happen during that time at Louisiana Tech, and this was the development that a football coach invested himself in. You see, in 1943, in that spring, my dad and 21 of his classmates answered the call of duty from their country. And Dad joined the 2nd Division Marine Corps, went overseas in the Pacific campaign. Joe IA said, guys, I'm going to hold your scholarships for you, and I'm going to communicate with you. And every month, Dad got a letter from Joe IA asking him how he was doing, telling him what was going on at Louisiana Tech. My dad and those 21 fellow football players came back to Louisiana Tech in 1946, completed their playing careers, completed their degrees. They did that because of athletics and a football coach that understood he was more than just coming out to win a football game. He was investing in young people and developing them into the adults that they were going to be. When my dad passed away 5 years ago at the Veterans Center in Bossier City, he had a portrait of Joe IA above his bed. That's the impact this coach had on development of a man that I hold in highest esteem. So many of our athletes, and listen, at LSU, we're talking about a different animal. LSU A&M in Baton Rouge is the highest performing athletics that exist anywhere in the country. So many of the athletes that come to LSU, especially when you think of football and basketball and baseball, are going to play at the next level, and they're going to be professionals. That is fantastic. When you think about the benefits to the state of Louisiana, the caliber of LSU athletics, it's invaluable. It's immense, and it's got to be maintained at an extraordinarily high level. But that's a small part of the athletes that we serve. The vast majority of athletes that come to play basketball, and by the way, at another extraordinary, I still remember them coming up and beating the Demons, and I was heartbroken. The basketball program at LSU A and the baseball program at LSU E and athletics that goes across our system. These are athletes that are coming that athletics is a way for them to complete their college degree. I think about my doctor that I go and see, Dr. Matthew Chamberlain, my personal physician, LSU baseball player. I'm not sure if he had a professional career. It couldn't have been long enough because he's already doing medicine. He might have been good enough to do that, but he was developed as an athlete and developed as a scholar and is performing at the highest level in his field. Mackenzie Cole, I remember Mackenzie, I met her at my first volleyball game I attended. She was at Northwestern State, and they were throwing out balls to people in the audience. And she came over to me and she handed me one. She says, I didn't think, oh man, that you could catch. So I want to give you this ball, which was kind of fun. And I watched as she grew, not only as an athlete, and they performed at a high level. They won their conference championship. She won numerous accolades, but I watched her succeed in the classroom. And now she is a mother and a physician's assistant in Texas. And so much of what she is, she can attribute back to what comes from athletics. The ability to work as part of a team towards a goal, a unified goal. Athletics is essential. I was an athlete, not nearly of the caliber of some that you deal with. My career was cut short because of injury. But I think back on the camaraderie that I built, the respect that I developed for my teammates, the respect I developed for those who supported us and engaged us along the way. Athletics is essential to the holistic development of the individual, in addition to being a rallying call for those to come around and support our institution. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, this is the last question. You have given very thoughtful answers to all our questions, but now it's your turn. What questions do you have for us?
This is the hardest part of an interview, right? I mean, I could ask, when do I start? But that's not appropriate. The question to ask, and I don't mean that to sound egotistical, I'm just trying to make a joke, but the question I would want to ask you, and any of you could answer this, or one of you can answer or not, but when you look back on this process 10 years from now, how will you know that it was successful? What will be the way that you describe this university that says we made the right decision 10 years ago when we chose this person to be our president? What would that look like to you?
Well, I'll start, but I'm sure other people will will want to answer too. In 10 years, I probably will still be here. I won't retire. I won't be retired yet.
Good.
And I and I think I will judge the success of our recommendations and the decision of the board if LSU is transformed to the next level. It rises to the national visibility level that it deserves in all aspects. And I could talk hours about that, but I would like to leave time for other people to answer too.
Well, I want to thank you for that. And certainly you have contributed more than many in elevating that institution. And my son, who graduated from UL Lafayette in 7 semesters with degrees in physics, chemistry, and math, has told me more about your work than I ever thought I wanted to know. But this poor journalism graduate, I get about every other word, so it works.
I won't tell you about black holes then. Ms. Warner, maybe for the board.
Oh, thank you. Thank you again for the time, Dr. Henderson.
Yes, ma'am.
I think I have a unique perspective because, as most everyone knows, I'm very close to someone who can look back 20 years and see, and I was, privy to a lot of conversations and angst and joy and despair through what we have already talked about today, which was being on the cusp and then the devastating budget cuts. So what that has taught us is one, not just to be resilient, but also to learn how to prepare for any eventuality. Who would have thought that we would look back on the tremendous cuts in higher education and then look at a pandemic and try to decide which was more devastating to higher education in Louisiana. I think when we look back in 10 years, from my perspective on the board, we want to see a unified system. And, it's such a strange way for us to, we always, battle around those terms around here, don't we? But all the enterprises of LSU working in concert and with leadership that can take each aspect and bring them up to, with the leadership, the faculty, the research, and our students, and bring them up to the level that we expect. All of our enterprises can be looked at with a lot of diversity, from LSUE, our 2-year institution, all the way to Pennington, to our health science centers. There's so much in between. And LSU has to move forward in our strength as one. However, everybody has their unique mission. And the way I look at it is a unique mission, not just to Louisiana, but really to this nation. We've talked about transformation in the energy business. We've talked about, the research of researchers like Dr. Gonzalez, but also our medical researchers, our ag researchers, food insecurity, water issues, all those things that are very important in this state. In 10 years, where will we be? How will we come together with the leadership under one system to really use all of the talents and all of the expertise that LSU embodies, which is tremendous. We affect the globe, but we need to be at that level and that status. And that takes work with the governor, the legislature, your board, and then all your faculty leaders to make this happen. And I think that it's a huge job, but that'll be the mark of success, that we make progress in that area.
Supervisor Warner, that came across in the description that you put forward when you advertised for this position. When the person from Parker Search called me and articulated, that came across as well. It was a compelling vision for what LSU can be. It's the reason that I responded and submitted my application. By the way, I have conducted 4 presidential searches in the last 4 years at universities around the state. It is an arduous task. You're going to hear from 7 or 8 candidates, all of which are going to say things that are compelling to you, and that's important. I have to say that the folks from Parker have done an extraordinary job in keeping, at least from my perspective, keeping me engaged, keeping me informed of the process. I applaud you for that. I thank you for that, and I applaud you for the transparency that you've engaged, that you've demonstrated in this process. It's absolutely key if you're going to have the buy-in from the constituencies that you serve. And so thank you for your vision, but most importantly, thank you for ensuring we had a process that's going to lead I think, to the right outcome for you, and appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
You know, I'd like to add, I think it's incredibly important, and you spoke about this initially, and Supervisor Warner kind of referenced it as well. But I think that we'll be in a great place a decade from now when there's the next pandemic, the next, whatever the change is, the key policymakers, legislators, as well as the constituents that we serve, recognize the expertise that exists on campus. At times it feels like it doesn't translate well. There's not a strong or compelling case that we actually have a lot of the answers to the challenges, but there's something that's stopping us from having that connection. So when those constituents see our value and see that we're the expertise, that we have an expertise that's valuable, I think that we'll be in a good place.
I agree. Thank you for that.
Well, we want to thank you so much again for taking the time to meet with us, even if virtually. And we appreciate so much your interest in this position. We'll keep in touch. And
thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Your decision is so important for Louisiana. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson.
Thank you very much. Bye now.
Bye now.